Okay, welcome. So today's video is just a quick inspection that I'm going to do, and I'm going to explain what I'm doing. Um, First thing is really to give the bees a small amount of smoke. So there we go, just puff a bit of smoke into the entrance. This is to stop or to hide the alarm pheromone. So when we open the hive, sometimes the bees get a bit um, stressed out, or they get a bit worried that you've opened their hive up and they release an alarm pheromone. So that smoke will just mask it. I'm just looking at the Hive records. Very important that you have Hive records, otherwise you will forget what you've done at your last inspection or the state of the hive, especially once you have a number of hives. So I'm just removing some storage that I have onto the hive, a bit of insulation. And I'm just removing the super. So this is where the honey is stored. And I'm not even going to check this. You can normally tell by the weight, especially after you've had a bit of experience, you can tell by the weight how much honey is in there and whether or not they need another honey super added on. I think I just said there that they do need another honey super because it's got quite a bit of weight. I'm just going to remove the queen excluder now. If you can look at my hive tool here, I'm pushing it upwards so that it doesn't damage the brood box below. And always important to have a look on the queen excluder to make sure the queen isn't there. So all of the queens I have, I mark them with a color so that I can easily find them. But don't always rely on the color. Sometimes the bees do get rid of the color. I've just removed the dummy board here to give me some space. And now we're just using the hive tool to prise apart some of these frames. They stick the frames together using propolis, so you just have to break that propolis seal. Okay, so this is a frame of stores. It's a frame of honey. You can see all the honey there. And you do want to make sure that the hive has plenty of honey. They need roughly 2 frames worth of honey to keep them going for a whole week. That's assuming they're stuck indoors all day, the weather's not good, and they can't go out and forage. But 2 frames of honey is plenty, and it means 2 frames of honey. The honey can be split in between a number of different frames, but as long as they have, between 1 and 2, you should be fine. This is the first frame of brood. I should also add that this is the first inspection on this hive I have done in the year, and they are actually quite strong considering it's the first inspection. I'm just making sure here that the queen has laid eggs in these cells. So this is a frame of brood. You can tell by the biscuity brownish color segmented um, cells here that this is actually brood. So far we had 1 frame of stores and 2 frames of brood. Always good to remember. This is a frame of brood as well. So usually the brood frames will be all together. They don't have brood and then honey and then brood and honey. The brood is all together. And they do that so that they can keep the brood warm. They can cluster around the brood, especially if it gets cold in the night, and they can keep it warm. Loosening up the next bunch of frames here. I tend to loosen, this is just my way of doing it, I tend to loosen a whole bunch of them at one go, 3 or 4. So what am I actually checking for then? So a couple of things. I've checked for stores. We already talked about that. I'm checking to see that the queen is here and she's laying. I don't need to see her, but I need to see that there's eggs in the cells, and that sort of tells me that the queen has been there or is there, and she's laying eggs, which means the next progeny of bees will be out soon, and the colony won't dwindle. I'm also making sure that the bees have enough space. So if this brood box here becomes completely full of bees, then I can add another box on top. You saw that I had this box here, the super box, the honey box on top. If the honey box becomes full, I can add another honey box on top. So you just keep it going. You keep it going, and you go ahead of the bees' requirement. You don't want to keep them feeling congested. If they feel congested, there's a tendency for them to swarm early. That's another frame of brood as well. Notice how I put the frames back in. I'm very gentle to make sure I don't crush any bees. So I'm up to the last bunch of frames now. Look at the way I'm holding the frame here. Can you see the way I'm holding the lug? I'm just pinching the top of the frame, because sometimes what happens is there'll be a bee underneath the lug, and if you just grab it, the bee will tend to sting you. And that'll be because you've crushed the bee. It's not because the bees are aggressive in any way. It's just because it's a natural reaction for them. But this colony is a very nice colony, very gentle colony. You can see they're just sitting there. They're not flying up towards my face. They're not trying to attack. They're just doing what they're doing, and they're allowing me to do what I'm doing. And the other thing I'm checking for also is swarm cells. So when the colony gets to a certain size, it's a natural reaction of the bees to want to swarm. Swarming for the bees is it's really having it's like having a baby. So it's a way of procreation. So the original queen, the queen which is in the hive, she will leave with about half of the workers. So half of the bees that you see here will go with the queen. They'll go to find a home somewhere else, and the bees will have started creating a queen cell. There's a special cell that when you see it, it looks a bit like like a peanut shell. And when you see that and it has food inside it, that's when you know the bees are trying to swarm. So I'm just counting up the number of frames which had brood in there, and I think it was 9. So that frame, the first frame didn't have brood; it had stores on there, and I think the last one here also had stores. So it's 11 frames in total. Take away the 2, which means we have 9 frames of brood, which is a very good amount considering this was in April I was doing this. So can you see the way I'm pushing all the frames back together? It's very important that you don't leave any gaps. If you leave any gaps, the bees will build comb in there, and the next time you try to remove a frame, it'll be very hard to remove, or there'll be all wild comb in there and you'll start damaging things. So I'm going to put the queen excluder back on. I'm just shaking the bees off from the sides, because the sides is where, it's touching the box here, and you can crush bees if you're not careful. So I'm gently putting it on, wiggling it back and forth, so that if there are any bees in there, they'll move when they feel the pressure on their backs. Adding a super. So this was the original super. I'm just adding that back and making sure that it's all aligned. You want to make sure there's no gaps, otherwise other bees can get in there and they will rob the honey out of a super as well. I'm just going to collect another honey box. We have some empty stored at this particular location, so I'm just going to find another one. You can see Selma in the background, my wife here. She's marking this queen with a green dot. So this was last year's queen. The colors represent the years, so we know that from that color she was a 2019 queen. Actually, while I'm gone to get the other box, look at this hive in the background that Salma's working on. It's a larger box. You can see the size of that. They call these 14 by 12s, and it's larger than the one I'm working on. So now I can remove the crown board. Oh, it looks like that crown board I need to change. It's falling apart. Doesn't seem to be many bees in there, but from the weight of the honey box, I can tell that we do need another super on here. I'm just going to have a look at one now. So just take this one off. And there you go. You can see that it's full of honey. They haven't capped it yet, so they haven't put a wax capping on, but it's very full. And gently lever it back in. Make sure you don't damage any bees. And put another box on. This box is empty, so it's one that we extracted honey from last year. and they'll fill that one up as well. As long as the honey, as long as the box is strong, as long as there's enough bees, and we had 9 frames of brood in here. So once all of that brood emerges, there'll be plenty of bees in this hive, and they need that extra space. So I'm just filling the hive record up now. So I'm going to put today's date on there. I'm going to put the number of frames of brood I saw, whether or not they have enough stores, whether I saw a queen cell or not, and whether or not I saw any signs of disease. That's another topic in its own right, so I won't go into that. But it's very important to have hive records because week on week you can see if the colony is expanding. Um, if last week it was on 5 frames of brood, I wouldn't have put an extra super on. But if I saw that I had 7 frames of brood, then I'd think, okay, I'm going to stick one on. Or you can think that okay, next week I'll come back. They'll have built up sufficiently by then, so I do need to put a super on. But it's all about forward planning. You want to read ahead of the bees at all times. I always like to provide a bit of insulation for them. And this is just storage really. Close the roof down. This is a very flimsy polystyrene roof, so I always put a brick on there, otherwise it will fly off. But that's it. The check has been done. I've checked to ensure that the colony is healthy. I didn't see any signs of swarming, so I can leave this hive for another week. I've added an extra super on there. I've completed my hive notes. Everything is good. So this is really a basic hive inspection that we have done. I hope this was useful. If you have any questions, then please let me know. Thank you.